So we're looking at solving quadratic equations today. Before you can solve a quadratic equation, you need to know what a quadratic equation is. Quadratic equations are equations of the form a x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. This is a quadratic equation. A, b, and c are real numbers. So now we have our quadratic equation and we know what a, b, and c are. There are three primary ways that we can solve these. The first is by factoring. So to factor an equation, you're going to try and get it in the form x minus p times x minus q is equal to 0. You may or may not have an a term out front. If a is 1, it will not appear out front. So in that case, your solutions would be x is equal to p or x is equal to q. The other ways you could solve this, if you graph the quadratic function, you end up with a parabola. Parabolas can cross the x-axis in one of three ways. Shown currently, we have two crossing points. Those are the solutions of the function. It could also never cross and be something like this. Then there's no real solution. Or it could come down, touch, and go back up. And that would have exactly one real solution. So that's what would happen with graphing. You'd graph it and see where it crosses the x-axis. While graphing can certainly be done by hand, it is most often done on a graphing calculator. And the third way that we can solve quadratic equations is using the quadratic formula, which is x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Here we're going to solve this quadratic equation, x squared minus 6x plus 9. We're going to start by doing this by graphing. When you graph a quadratic equation, you need to use negative b over 2a to find where the axis of symmetry will be. So we're going to plug in those values. So our axis of symmetry, x is equal to, the b value is negative 6. We have negative 6, will become positive 6, over 2 times, in this case no a is shown, so it's 1. So you have 6 over 2 times 1, which is 6 over 2, which is 3. To find then where the vertex would be, we have our original function and we plug it in. 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 9, and we work that out. 9 minus 18 plus 9, and that comes out to 0. And this parabola opens upwards because a is positive. We know that our axis of symmetry is when x is 3 and y is 0. Using our memorized points, we go over 1, up 1, over 2, up 4, and using our axis of symmetry to get points on both sides, over 3, up 9. This is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So our parabola looks something, oh, that was terrible. Our parabola looks something like this. It touches the x-axis once and only once at the point 3, 0. So our solution is that point. We have solved the quadratic equation, and since we only needed x, x must be 3. You plug that back in, and we already did. We saw 3 gave us 0. So that worked out very nicely. Now let's do it by factoring. So the first thing we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to decide what method of factoring. And I like to use the ACB method. Here, A times C is 9, and B is negative 6. We need something that multiplies to give us 9, and adds to give us negative 6. That's going to be negative 3 and negative 3. A negative times a negative is positive, so that gives us positive 9. And we add them together, we get negative 6. We're going to rewrite our function here, or our equation, as x squared minus 3x minus 3x, and note that those give us negative 6x, plus 9. And we're going to factor that by grouping. From these two, we can take out an x. That will leave us with x minus 3. From the latter two, we can take out a negative 3, and that will give us x minus 3 as well. And all of this is still equal to 0. Finally, we want to factor out the x minus 3 here. So that's going to get pulled out front, and then we see what's left. So here we'd be left with x, and here we'd be left with minus 3. And we find that this one has the same value there. X minus 3 is both. So x minus 3 must be equal to 0, or x minus 3 must be equal to 0, which when you solve it by adding 3 to both sides, gives you the solution x must equal 3. Again, this matches what we found when solving using graphing. So now we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. To do this, all we have to do is plug in our known values. So here, b is negative 6, and negative negative becomes positive, so we have 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared, and when we square a negative, it will become positive, minus 4 times a is 1, and c is 9, all over 2 times, again, a is 1. So now all we really need to do is work that out. 6 plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is 36. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 9 is also 36. So 36 minus 36, 2 times 1 is just 2. All of this is going to equal 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. Square root of 0 is 0, so it's just 6 over 2, which is 3. Therefore, x is equal to 3. So looking at another problem, very similar, but now instead of a being 1, we have that a is 3. But our approach is very, very similar. We're going to solve it by graphing and by taking factoring, and then by using the quadratic formula. So here, x is equal to negative b over 2a. That will give us our axis of symmetry. So in our case, x is equal to negative negative 2, or 2, over 2 times 3, which comes out to 1/3. Plug that in. 3 times 1/3 squared minus 2 times 1/3 minus 5. So we have negative 1/3 minus 5, or negative 5 1/3. So if we were to look at this, we have an upward opening parabola. So here, at 1/3, we have our axis of symmetry. And at negative 5 1/3 is our vertex. So there's our vertex. To graph our parabola, it would be best to go ahead and plug in a couple of points. So our graph would look something like this. And what we see is that it appears we have a solution here and a solution here. Of those, this solution might be a whole value. This one is definitely a fraction. So we can go in and we can make some estimates and test them out. So here, we could estimate that x is negative 1, and here x appears to be 1 and 2/3. Or you could put that as 5/3. So we can plug that in and check and see, do those work out? So at 1, negative 1 squared is 1. We'd have 3 times 1 plus 2 is 5. 5 minus 5 is 0. So x equals 1 does work out. That one we correctly got off our graph. So now let's try 5/3, which is 0. So x equals 5/3, or 1 and 2/3. To solve this by factoring, we're going to start again with the AC B method. So 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. That's our AC. And B is negative 2. So we need something that would multiply to give us negative 15 and add to give us negative 2. That'll include a positive and a negative value. So things that would multiply to give us 15 would include 3 and negative, or 3 and 5. We made the 5 negative and the 3 positive. They would multiply to give us negative 15 and add to give us negative 2. So we can split our equation's middle term. We get 3x squared plus 3x minus 5x minus 5 is equal to 0. Now we can factor by grouping. So from these, we can take out 3x. That would leave us with x plus 1. From these, we can take out negative 5, which leaves us with x plus 1. All of that is equal to 0. Now we want to take out the x plus 1 and factor that. So factoring out x plus 1, we're left with a 3x minus 5. Either x plus 1 equals 0, or 3x minus 5 equals 0. So now, we subtract 1 from both sides here. We get x is equal to negative 1. Then add 5 to both sides here, and we get 3x is equal 5 divided by 3. X must be 5/3. So x is equal to negative 1, or x is equal to positive 5/3. Finally, we can solve this with the quadratic formula. So again, all we have to do is identify a, which is our leading coefficient, 3, b, which in this case is negative 2, and c, which is negative 5, and then plug them in. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x is equal to negative 2 is just 2, plus or minus the square root. Negative 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times a is 3, and c is negative 5, all over 2 times 3. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. Negative 4 times a negative 5 gives positive 20. 20 times 3 is 60. All over 6. 2 times 3. We simplify that out a little. We get 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 all over 6, which is just 2 plus or minus 8 over 6. At this point, we have to split it into two separate problems. We have 2 plus 8 over 6, and we have 2 minus 8 over 6. 2 plus 8 is 10. We have 10 over 6, which simplifies to 5/3. That was one of our answers. 2 minus 8 is negative 6, and that becomes negative 1.